I was born and brought up in a place called Ardsmuir, which is right in the middle of the Arab Valley Hills. So it was in a very much a picturesque sort of place. There were hills all around. I was schooled there in the convent, in the convent high school. This was in India, obviously. Yeah, I schooled there and lived there for 16 years, going on to 17 years when I left the country. The life was lovely there, it really was. We used to enjoy it. We had, you know, a very open, free existence. We had a house, a big house, with quite a few animals to enjoy. We eventually then grew up in the town, and the riots started because they began to divide the town into part of it to India and part of it to the Mohammedans. But before we got to that stage, we really used to enjoy a very happy life there. We had a house with a big tennis court in the gardens, and we played tennis with people coming over. And what else can I tell you about it, except that the grounds were very big, so we sort of wandered around. We could almost get lost in it, which we enjoyed a lot with other young people of my age, which was about 8, 10, 12 years old at the time. And then we used to go out to dances and picnics, etc., and visit each other. But we lived quite far apart from one another because the houses were big and the grounds were very spacious. But we enjoyed it. I could carry on, I suppose, to tell you that my father worked on the railway there. He was an accountant there, and held a very comfortable position on the railway, which we rather enjoyed the results of, and lived very comfortably. We had a couple of horses and we used to ride those occasionally. And then eventually, to the age of about 15 or 16, they began, it was after the war, and the war was just ending then, and we were told that of course they would be dividing up the country, and England would be then withdrawing from India, which they really held for about 300 years, I think, which they did do, and we were left over there, not knowing whether to stay or not, but realised eventually that people who held good positions there with good money were suddenly now finding themselves without any jobs because they were naturally giving it to their own folk. So we decided to come here. Well, I got to Bombay, and I had never seen the sea before, so it was quite an experience. We lived right in the middle of India. We got on the ship, and when we started to sail, it was quite a queer feeling to feel that they had locked you in on this massive ship, which there were about 2,000 to 3,000 people on the ship. And we finally got to England in about the late February, and got off the ship, and when we looked across the crowd, there was nobody that we knew, not a single familiar face, except one in hundreds of people waiting there, and it was my brother John. So we met him and got on, we were waiting then in Swindon to get to where we lived in Watchfield. And while we waited on the station platform, which was the most dreadful time of my life, because I can remember standing on that station platform and it was drizzling with rain, and all the stonework in front of the station was black, and as it was sort of shining in the rain, I was standing there feeling as cold as ever and thinking, God, what have we done? It was a frightening feeling. And we got in a taxi and drove to Shibnam, Watchfield, where we had to stay in caravans for a little while because accommodation wasn't easy to come by. Dad couldn't get a house or anything like that. His money was frozen in India anyway. And so the taxi driver took us to Watchfield, where it was pitch black, and it pulled up and there were 3 little lights in the middle of the field, and they said, that's your house, that's where you're going to live. And I thought, my God, I've left a huge place, a big building, huge grounds around it, and life was so free. And suddenly I found I was, taken to this little tiny caravan, and I thought, is this going to be my life now? It was an awful feeling. And I was very young and a very impressionable age. I'd never worked in my life. None of our family had, because we had sufficient income. And it wasn't very nice for women to work in those days for abroad. And eventually, I remember we moved into a little house that Dad bought, because they let our money, some of our money come through. And we bought this little house, which wasn't very nice. It wasn't a nice part of Swindon. And lived in there. And I decided I was going to go out to work, because I just didn't want to live this way. So I was walking down the road one day and I thought, right, I'll go and get myself a job, even though my father didn't approve of it. And I got a job, which in those days was much easier than it is for you folk now. And I started working there, but not in the sort of work that I wanted to do. It was factory work, and it didn't appeal to me at all. I wanted to work in an office, obviously. So I worked in it for a few years, but I thought, I've got to get out of this. And so I did. I went from one to the other till eventually I found my way into an office, where I gained confidence then. And I worked in the office. My father sadly died then, and we just had Mum. And I lived with her for some years. And life was very hard at the time, because we were coping, just the two of us actually, my wages, and that's all. But you know, we struggled on as the years went by, till eventually my job improved a bit. We got some money from India eventually, but Dad had died about 7 years then before we got that. In those 7 years we had to struggle, which we did an awful lot. And eventually we found our places in England, where each one went into the sort of professions that they had taken up in India. My two brothers worked in the police, and I worked in an office here in Swindon. And we gradually then settled down. And then life became easier, because it was a long time though, it was a good 7 to 8 years before we managed to sort of get on our feet again. And during those times we thought we never would, you know. Even before my father died, he said, we are going back, aren't we? And Mum would always say, yes, yes, we've always got money to go back. Because she didn't want him to know that we couldn't go back if we wanted to, but we didn't want to. So we managed to cope. I don't think there's much more I can tell you about that, except that now we're all happily settled here. And we've all got jobs, and we've all managed to sort of get on our feet again. But it took a big slice out of our lives. That's sort of moving over from east to west. But we did it, and we coped. That's all I've got to say.